My own daughter told me to grab my suitcase. I was done helping. Her mother-in-law smirked from the kitchen like she'd just won a game, all because I wouldn't scrub her bathroom grout. I left without a word, but I didn't leave empty-handed. 2 months later, the deed to their house was in my name, and the new tenants didn't even know the history they were living in. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The house smelled like lemon disinfectant and scented candles, the kind that tried too hard to mask tension. Marlene had been there less than a week, sleeping in the converted home office with its narrow twin bed and tower of unopened Amazon boxes. She didn't mind the clutter. She was used to making do. But she noticed that Kelsey hadn't said thank you, not once. Kelsey's surgery had been minor, laparoscopic gallbladder removal, but she'd milked it like a drawn-out soap opera. "I can't even twist," she said dramatically as she watched Marlene cook eggs that first morning, perched on the couch like a porcelain doll with a neck pillow and 4 streaming subscriptions. By Wednesday, Amanda Banks had arrived. Chanel perfume, tinted glasses, and a frown like she'd walked into a motel. She didn't take off her shoes when she came in, just clicked across the hardwood with entitlement that bled into every room. She gave Marlene a once-over, lips pinched. "So you're staying here a while?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. "Just till Kelsey's back on her feet," Marlene said calmly, folding a dish towel. Amanda sniffed. "Well, while you're here, maybe you could give the guest bath a once-over. I noticed the grout's a bit gray." Kelsey didn't hesitate. "She's already been wiping down the counters. It's just easier this way." Marlene stood there for a moment, dish towel still in her hands. She heard the blood rush in her ears before she nodded, slowly, and walked to the hallway closet for the mop. The bathroom floor was cold. She wrung out the soapy water and moved methodically, back aching, scrubbing silently while Amanda laughed about HOA drama in the kitchen. She caught her own reflection in the mirror, crouched low, wearing old Reeboks and Kelsey's university sweatshirt, sleeves rolled up. For a flicker of a second, she didn't recognize herself. Josie peeked in from the hallway, holding a juice pouch and half a sleeve of crackers. "I brought you a snack," she whispered. "You don't have to do that, Grandma." Marlene smiled, just barely, and took the crackers. "Thank you, sweetheart." Josie sat cross-legged in the doorway, silently guarding her. Later that night, the kitchen lights were too bright. Marlene moved softly through the space, folding the last dish towel, setting the counter straight. Kelsey came downstairs in matching loungewear, scrolling on her phone with a glass of Pinot. "You don't have to reorganize everything, Mom." "I wasn't," Marlene said simply. Kelsey leaned on the fridge, eyeing her with a mix of irritation and performance. "Just don't act like a guest, okay? You're living here for free. Amanda says it's important to have boundaries." Marlene met her daughter's eyes for the first time all day. They were the same pale gray she remembered when Kelsey was 10 and scraped her knee, only colder now, more rehearsed. Marlene didn't answer. She picked up her tea and went upstairs. The following morning was quiet. Too quiet. Amanda's luxury SUV was already in the driveway when Marlene came downstairs. Marlene went to refill the bird feeder in the backyard, one of the few tasks that gave her a sense of rhythm. She stood there a moment, sunflower seeds in hand, watching the dry Arizona wind rattle the hibiscus. When she stepped back inside, she froze. Her suitcase was by the door, upright, zipped, waiting. A folded throw blanket sat on top. Her shoes were placed beside it, heels aligned. The message was unmistakable. Kelsey was in the kitchen, holding coffee with both hands like she was cold. Amanda leaned against the island like it was her own. "We need the space," Kelsey said flatly. "Amanda's staying the weekend, and you've done what you came to do." Marlene said nothing. Her fingers tightened around the birdseed bag. Josie stood at the top of the stairs, half hidden behind the banister, a stuffed bunny clutched to her chest. Her lip trembled. "Grandma?" she called, barely audible. Marlene turned to her. "It's all right, honey," she said. But it wasn't. She picked up her suitcase, one wheel catching on the entry rug. No one offered to help. No one moved. As the front door closed behind her, the heat hit her full in the face. She walked down the sidewalk, no destination in mind, just the hard sun and the slow spin of betrayal settling in her stomach. At the bus stop, she sat on the bench, opened her bag, and pulled out her old leather ledger, pages thick with decades of careful notations. The numbers had always calmed her. Facts didn't lie. People did. Her phone buzzed. Ray Delgado. "That neighborhood you asked about? Something's brewing." Marlene stared at the screen. Then, slowly, she smiled. The motel room smelled like a mix of disinfectant and old upholstery, a scent that clung to everything, even silence. Marlene stood just inside the door for a moment, her suitcase still in hand, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dim, buzzing light overhead. The air conditioner groaned in the window like it had given up trying to cool anything a long time ago. She didn't care. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here for quiet. She set her suitcase down gently beside the low, nubby bed and sat on its edge, her palms resting on her knees. The stillness wrapped around her like a worn quilt, unfamiliar, but not unkind. Her fingers ached from the suitcase handle, but she didn't let herself rest yet. Not fully. Not yet. The walk from Kelsey's house had only taken 15 minutes, but it felt like she had crossed something larger than a neighborhood, like she had moved out of one identity and was still waiting to see who she was on the other side. For months, she had kept her head down, believing her daughter's invitation came from love, not convenience. She'd told herself she was useful, helpful, needed even. But standing outside in the heat earlier, staring at her own suitcase by the door like a guest overstaying a silent clock, something inside her had cracked just enough to let the truth in. She reached for her purse and pulled out the old leather ledger, the one she hadn't shown anyone in over a decade. Its cover was smooth from time and use, the corners worn soft. She placed it carefully on the motel desk and flipped through the pages with steady hands, the neat handwriting inside a reminder that some things, unlike family, did not betray you. The entries stretched back decades, small pay bumps from the hospital, a side hustle in medical transcription she had picked up after her husband passed, every check stub from years of night shifts and double weekends. Each line was a record of sacrifice, of planning, of survival. There was no extravagance here, just structure and control. Two things she had never expected to lose inside her own daughter's home. One number, circled 3 times in green ink, stared back at her. Her long-term care savings. The amount she had never touched, even when her old car stalled in the middle of the 101, even when she'd cracked a crown and insurance wouldn't cover the replacement. She had protected that fund like a wall, not out of selfishness, but because she had been told for years that someday she might need to depend on others. That money had been her insurance against becoming a burden. And yet, she heard the distant rumble of traffic on the freeway, a soft, constant thrum like someone else's pulse. She stood, stretched her back with a quiet sigh, and moved toward the narrow motel window. Outside, the parking lot was lit by a flickering overhead lamp that gave everything a yellow, anxious hue. A man in his 20s was sitting on the curb beside a tired sedan, scrolling his phone. A child's bike lay tipped on its side by the soda machine. This wasn't where she imagined she'd be at 66. But then again, she'd never imagined her own daughter would treat her like a temp hired to tidy up grief and inconvenience. Her phone vibrated on the desk. Ray Delgado. "That neighborhood you asked about? Something's brewing. We should talk." Marlene stared at the screen for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the message. She thought of Amanda's perfume clouding the kitchen, of Kelsey's clipped tone as she explained that boundaries were necessary. She remembered Josie's small hand wrapped around her wrist and the sound of that little voice calling from the stairs, fragile, tremulous, unsure. No one had expected her to push back. They thought dignity was something you could strip from a woman without a scene, that if you made the rejection silent, the pain wouldn't echo. She placed the phone face down on the desk and walked to the bathroom to wash her face. The water ran cold for several seconds before turning lukewarm. It didn't matter. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone she hadn't seen in a long time. Not the caretaker, not the background figure, but the woman who'd once worked 3 shifts straight, put a daughter through private school and paid off her mortgage 2 years ahead of schedule. She dried her face slowly, then turned off the light. Tomorrow she would call Ray. Tonight, she would sleep in a room that belonged to no one but her. The diner Ray had chosen was tucked behind a strip mall, a half-forgotten local place with cracked leather booths and laminated menus that hadn't been updated since 2009. Marlene arrived early and chose a seat by the window. She liked having her back to the wall. Old habits. When Ray walked in, he was carrying a small manila folder and wearing the same quiet expression he'd had the day they first met at her credit union's seminar on retirement planning. No flashy suit, no hard pitch. Just a subtle awareness that some people preferred their power quiet. He slid into the booth across from her and ordered black coffee without looking at the menu. After a few pleasantries, he opened the folder between them. "You were right to ask about that neighborhood," he said, tapping a map with 3 red X's marked in the cul-de-sac near Chestnut Drive. "The bank's house is behind on payments. Trevor co-signed a second mortgage against it, probably to float his business, and it didn't float." Marlene folded her hands in her lap. "How far behind?" 3 months, officially. Foreclosure clock's already ticking. He slid a printout across the table. 67 days until the property is reassigned, unless they catch up. Spoiler, they won't. The waitress appeared with Ray's coffee and a water for Marlene. Neither of them reached for it. The folder sat between them like a sealed door with one key. "Would they know if someone stepped in?" she asked, her voice calm, surgical. "If it's public, yes, but if it comes through a blind LLC?" He gave a slight shrug. "They wouldn't even see it coming until the ink was dry." Marlene took a slow sip of her water, then reached into her purse and removed the leather ledger. She didn't open it. She simply placed it beside the folder. "I can pay in cash," she said. "I want the process discreet, legal, no fingerprints." Ray nodded once, like he'd been waiting for her to say that. "I'll register the LLC this week. We'll call it Copper Sun Equity Holdings. Generic enough to vanish in a list." There was no triumph in her tone, no smugness in her posture, just resolve. Marlene didn't believe in revenge for its own sake. She believed in balance, and balance required action. Back at the motel later that night, she propped her laptop on her knees and scrolled through social media under an old dummy profile she rarely used. Amanda Banks was tagged in a new post, a wide-angle photo of their backyard, newly staged with imported teak patio furniture and potted succulents. Amanda Banks. The desert can be elegant too, grateful for this view, and for the people who know how to treat a guest with class. Kelsey was smiling stiffly in the corner of the photo, glass of wine in hand. Trevor was absent. Marlene stared at the screen, studying every detail. The post had 36 likes and a string of heart emojis from Amanda's HOA friends. She didn't react, didn't save the post, didn't need to. She closed the browser and pulled out a legal pad from the drawer beside the bed. On it, she began to sketch out a timeline. Property auction windows, LLC paperwork finalization, transfer logistics. There was comfort in the structure. The clarity gave her peace. Her phone buzzed beside her hand. "Josie. Grandma, I miss you." The words were simple. No emojis, just the kind of message a child sends when she doesn't know what she's allowed to say but needs to say something anyway. Marlene ran her finger across the screen but didn't type back right away. She imagined Josie tucked into bed under the pink comforter she'd bought her last Christmas, the one Amanda probably called garish. She wondered if her granddaughter had noticed how no one said her name anymore, how she'd been erased like an old post, no longer on brand. Finally, Marlene typed 2 words, "always here." Then she turned off the lamp and lay back down in the dark, the corners of the legal pad still warm in her lap. The documents came through quietly, exactly as Ray had promised. No celebration, no fanfare, just an email with the subject line, "Executed sale confirmed. Welcome, Copper Sun Equity Holdings." Marlene sat in the motel room's single upright chair, her laptop perched on the desk as she stared at the PDF. The file name was long and technical, but what it signified was remarkably simple. She now owned the house Kelsey and Amanda had stood in while asking her to leave. Not her name, not her face, but her fingerprints were on every inch of the paperwork. She had read the purchase agreement 3 times already, her eyes lingering on the parcel number, the HOA references, the subtle notations Ray had explained during their last call. Everything was protected under the LLC, structured in a way that ensured her involvement would remain invisible. Ray had already taken the next steps. The locks were scheduled for rekeying the following Monday. A property management team, people Marlene had interviewed quietly through referrals, was in motion. Security cameras were being installed above the garage and by the front door for the new tenant's peace of mind, as Ray put it. Marlene didn't ask what it would feel like to walk into a home and discover the locks didn't work anymore. She already knew. Her own hands had tightened around that suitcase handle weeks ago when she felt the door closing on her. Let them find out now what it means to be shut out of your own illusions. At a nearby post office branch, the change of ownership paperwork went unchallenged. The forwarding address form for the Bankses had never been filed correctly. As a result, a handful of HOA letters and tax documents meant for Trevor and Kelsey had quietly returned to sender. One by one, they began to accumulate in the management company's inbox instead. When the HOA noticed the discrepancy, they reached out with a polite but direct message. Dear homeowner, per your governing agreement, please note the 30-day window to complete your transition as the new owner of record. Welcome to the Chestnut Bluffs HOA. Marlene had read it twice, then forwarded it to Ray with a simple note. They'll know now, or soon. At the Banks house, Amanda was the first to unravel. She had been posting pictures again, brunch in the backyard, her latest rosé haul from a wine club that only shipped to elevated palates. Her captions always had the same brittle edge. Grateful for a peaceful oasis. Some people should take notes. The day the HOA letter landed in their physical mailbox was the first time Amanda went completely silent online. It was Trevor who brought the envelope inside and handed it to Kelsey, asking, Do you know anything about this? Kelsey skimmed it twice, then again, more slowly, her jaw tightening with each line. Amanda read over her daughter-in-law's shoulder, her voice shrill by the second sentence. This has to be a mistake. This is our home. We didn't sell anything. Kelsey shook her head, already reaching for her laptop. There's no way, she muttered, pulling up their online mortgage account. The login spun for several seconds, then flashed a red banner. Account inactive. For assistance, contact your servicer. She clicked again. Tried another portal. The result was the same. She opened her email and fired off a message to the servicing company, her tone frantic but clipped. Urgent. Account error. Possible fraud. Need immediate contact. There was no reply. By nightfall, Amanda had called the HOA twice and left voicemails that barely hid her panic. This is absolutely incorrect, she snapped. We've lived here for 6 years. We hosted the spring social. Who would even buy this house? Who approved that? No one answered. The kitchen lights were still on when Amanda finally turned away from the phone, her eyes glassy and red. This isn't happening, she whispered. But it was, quietly, clinically. A transfer that left no bruises, just locks that didn't fit, and silence that couldn't be reasoned with. The rental application came through at 6:42 a.m., just as the sun began pushing over the flat horizon behind the motel's weather-stained blinds. Marlene had barely sipped her first cup of lukewarm coffee when the alert pinged her inbox. She opened it cautiously, expecting the usual string of incomplete applications and dead-end credit reports. But this one was different. A name, Danica Lowe. Profession, registered nurse, Banner Thunderbird Medical Center. References? 3, all handwritten, all spotless. Her income qualified. Her background check passed in less than 10 minutes. The cover letter was short, direct, and something Marlene hadn't seen in a long time. I'm looking for stability. I've been priced out of 4 neighborhoods in the last 3 years. I want a place to put down roots. Quietly, respectfully. I'm not afraid of old hinges or overgrown gardens. I just want something I can care for. Ray texted 30 minutes later, This one's a gift. You'll like her. By noon, Marlene had approved the lease. And by sunset, Danica Lowe had moved in. It happened with surgical precision. The Bankses were gone by 3:15 p.m., their final boxes jammed into the back of a rented U-Haul, Amanda barking at Trevor in the driveway while Kelsey stood off to the side, arms crossed and silent. No neighbors came to wave them off. No one brought lemonade. The house they'd weaponized as a status symbol had become just another stop on a list of losses. They never saw Marlene. She was parked a few houses up in a borrowed sedan, windows cracked, engine off. She didn't need to gloat, just witness. At 4:08 p.m., Danica pulled up in a modest hatchback, back seat packed with flattened cardboard boxes, a potted aloe, and a rescued tabby cat in a soft-sided crate. She stepped out in scrubs, hair pulled into a loose braid, her movements confident but unassuming. The property manager handed her the new keys and walked her through the security code reset. Danica's eyes widened slightly as she stepped into the entryway, taking in the high ceilings and tiled floors, still echoing from emptiness. She didn't ask why the house was so spotless, or why the lawn had just been trimmed that morning. Some people knew not to question good fortune. That night, Marlene stood at the edge of the backyard, hidden behind the tall stone privacy wall. The garden lights flicked on automatically. She remembered installing them years ago when Kelsey was still on speaking terms with Logic. Now, under new hands, they looked warmer somehow, more earned. Danica had placed the aloe on the kitchen windowsill and left a bedroom light on. She moved gently through the rooms, unpacking slowly, with intention. As if she believed a home deserved to be earned, not assumed. 2 days later, Marlene returned under the pretense of adjusting the side gate latch. The management team had flagged it in the walk-through notes, minor repair, but still Marlene insisted on handling it herself. When Danica saw her walk up the path with a small toolbox in hand, she didn't flinch. She stepped out barefoot and smiled. "You must be Marlene," she said, voice clear, kind. "Ray told me you might swing by. I just wanted to make sure the lock's catching properly." Danica motioned her in. "Come through the back. I've got a kettle on." The gate clicked into place after a small adjustment. Marlene worked quickly, methodically, wiping her hands on a folded rag she'd brought in her jacket pocket. When she stepped inside, the house already smelled like fresh ginger tea and sandalwood. There were no luxury throw pillows, no curated color palettes, just lived-in warmth. On the mantel, where Amanda had once perched a rotating shrine of self-portraits, there now sat a child's drawing, hastily colored with crayons, edges slightly torn. A heart drawn in red, inside it the words, "Grandma lives in my heart." Marlene froze. Danica followed her gaze. "I found it in the smallest upstairs room, under the floorboard. Must have been from the previous family?" Marlene nodded slowly. "Yes, must have been." Danica poured 2 mugs of tea and handed one over with quiet confidence. Whoever that grandma was, that kid really loved her. Marlene accepted the cup with both hands, her grip firm but reverent. "She did," she said softly. Outside, the wind stirred through the citrus trees, scattering petals across the back patio. The first time Kelsey tried to trace the ownership, she assumed it would be simple. She'd worked in mid-tier marketing firms long enough to know how to dig up domain registrations and public tax records. She knew the shape of a paper trail, and she was convinced her mother, no matter how cunning she'd suddenly become, had left one behind. She didn't speak a word to Amanda or Trevor that afternoon. She simply opened her laptop in the corner of the cramped rental they were now sharing, one town over, barely outside Glendale proper, and began typing with controlled fury. Parcel lookup, county deeds, homeowners association transfer records, tax assessor links. Her fingers moved with the kind of desperation she hadn't allowed herself to show when the locks changed, but every document told her the same thing. Copper Sun Equity Holdings, registered agent, redacted, primary contact, redacted. There was no sign of Marlene's name. No signature, no identifier. Just a limited liability corporation registered through a trust she couldn't penetrate. The trail stopped dead at a blind mailbox in Scottsdale. She slammed her laptop shut and muttered a curse under her breath, startling Amanda in the next room. Amanda, now a permanent fixture in their lives again, had made it her mission to narrate every downfall as if it were someone else's fault. "Why would the HOA even allow it?" she barked later that night. Don't they have to notify residents? This reeks of favoritism. Trevor, who'd spent the last 2 weeks watching his credit score disintegrate one auto notification at a time, didn't look up from his phone. They did notify us, he said flatly. You threw the letter out, said it looked like junk. Amanda went quiet for a second. Then, well, someone should have followed up. Kelsey didn't respond. She couldn't. She knew now that the house was gone, not just in bricks and deed, but in history. It didn't matter that her name had once been on the mailbox. It wasn't hers anymore. Across town, Danica placed a fresh planter box beneath the living room window, anchoring it with smooth river stones and clusters of purple verbena. It was a Sunday morning, cloudless and hot, but she worked with the ease of someone who understood the difference between sweat and labor. By noon, the house looked as though it had taken a long breath in. Marlene stopped by late that afternoon with 2 small bags, one holding a replacement light bulb for the garage fixture, and the other a small gift for Danica, a folded quilt neatly wrapped in brown paper. It's nothing special, she said, just something I never had use for at the motel. Danica took it carefully, smiling. It already feels like home. But thank you. Before Marlene left, she paused in front of the house and turned slowly to admire the windows. The new flowers nodded gently in the breeze. The aloe on the sill had doubled in size. Funny, she said softly, almost to herself, how something blooms once the weeds are cleared. Danica didn't ask what she meant. She only looked toward the garden and nodded. Later that evening, Marlene returned to her motel room and opened her mailbox. A large manila envelope sat waiting. Inside was a school portrait. Josie, beaming in a turquoise shirt with slightly crooked bangs and that familiar glint of gentle mischief in her eyes. The photo wasn't signed. No note, no card. But Marlene could feel the message tucked between every pixel of that smile. She placed the picture gently against the wall above the desk, propping it between a stack of folders and her ledger. The motel light buzzed overhead, but she didn't mind. Her phone buzzed once. Ray. She tried to trace the LLC today, hit all the walls we set up. Marlene stared at the screen, then typed one word. Good. She rose and crossed to the small fridge in the corner, pulling out a cold bottle of ginger ale she'd been saving. As the cap snapped open, she glanced back at the school photo, Josie's eyes shining with a kind of innocence that even now made her breath catch. She raised the bottle in a quiet toast. To the ones who never stopped seeing you. The invitation was handwritten in soft blue ink on ivory stationery, understated but thoughtful. Danica had slid it across the cafe table when they met for tea the week prior, smiling gently. Just a small thing, she'd said. Some neighbors, a few co-workers. I'd really love it if you came. Marlene hadn't answered immediately. She'd studied the curves of the letters instead. There was something almost fragile about being asked, like a muscle she hadn't used in a long time. Not needed, wanted. So, on a Saturday morning painted with warm light and trimmed lawns, Marlene stepped through the gate she once fixed herself, now adorned with a grapevine wreath Danica must have made by hand. She brought a bottle of sparkling elderflower water and a basket of scones wrapped in a linen towel. The house looked different, lighter, as if it had finally exhaled. Inside, soft music played from a Bluetooth speaker tucked into a shelf. The air smelled like citrus and something faintly floral, lavender maybe. The windows were open. The breeze carried laughter and the rustling of napkins. Guests lingered in clusters, sipping lemonade or iced tea. A toddler clutched a balloon animal. Someone had brought a tray of cucumber sandwiches. Marlene spotted the HOA president near the back patio, an older woman named Jeanette, whose gold-framed glasses caught every glint of sun. Danica introduced them. Jeanette, this is Marlene. She's the one who made sure this place stayed standing long enough for me to love it. Jeanette gave Marlene a handshake and a sharp, curious glance. I have to ask, this house came back on the market under such unusual circumstances. I mean, foreclosure to private sale in under 90 days? That's rare. Marlene tilted her head slightly, lips curving. Sometimes, she said, you get evicted from a place so you can own it. Jeanette blinked, her mouth open slightly before letting out a surprised laugh. Well, I guess that's one way to put it. Danica caught Marlene's gaze from across the room and gave her a subtle nod, like she'd just watched a door close that no one else had seen open. Later, someone snapped a photo near the fireplace. Marlene standing between Danica and Jeanette, holding a glass of sparkling water, sunlight catching the silver in her hair. She didn't know the picture had been posted until the next morning, but Amanda saw it that night. The image had made its way to the HOA's Facebook group, buried between posts about water restrictions and contractor referrals. But there it was, her old house, blooming under someone else's care, and Marlene standing in it like the past had never happened. The next morning, Amanda left a voicemail for Kelsey so loud it echoed through the paper-thin rental walls. "You let her humiliate us. She's in the house, hosting parties, posing with board members. And what the hell is she wearing? That cardigan. She wore that the day she moved out." Kelsey didn't answer. She hadn't answered any of Amanda's calls in 2 days. She sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the post in silence, teeth pressed to her lower lip. Marlene looked nothing like the woman Kelsey had last seen in the living room, suitcase in hand, shrunken by shame. This version looked at ease, almost luminous. Across town, Marlene sat at the kitchen table of her motel suite, unaware of the brewing storm. She was unwrapping a small envelope that had arrived earlier that day, postmarked with Josie's school's return address. Inside was a note written in pink gel pen, with letters that tilted sideways but stood proudly. "Dear Grandma, thank you for always being kind, even when it wasn't easy. Loved, Josie." Beneath the note was a tiny hand-drawn star with a smiley face in the middle. Marlene pressed the paper to her chest, eyes wet but not breaking. Then she reached for a small wooden frame she'd bought at a thrift store last week and slid the letter inside. She packed it carefully into a tote marked "for the house" and zipped it shut. She had one more visit to make before the week was done. The envelope was plain white, no return address. Inside, one page, single-spaced, on thick paper that felt expensive in the hand. Kelsey found it on the front step of the rental duplex early Tuesday morning, just after a restless night marked by Amanda's pacing and Trevor's silence. She didn't open it right away. She already knew who it was from. When she finally unfolded it at the kitchen table, between an empty coffee mug and a stack of unpaid utilities, it confirmed what she'd suspected. "Dear applicant, after thorough review, your request to reclaim tenancy at 1129 North Hollow Glen has been formally denied. Per our finalized legal acquisition, no correspondence or appeal will be considered. Please consider this the final communication from Coppersun Equity Holdings. Sincerely, R.D. Managing Agent." There was no signature, no warmth, not even a line acknowledging her by name. Trevor entered the room just as she let the letter fall onto the table. He glanced at it, then at her. "So it's her," he said. Not a question. Kelsey didn't answer. She couldn't meet his eyes. Trevor sat down across from her. His face was thinner now, drawn, aged by weeks of instability and sleepless nights. He rubbed his forehead with both hands, then said, more quietly, "Your mom bought our house. Are you even listening to what that means?" Kelsey shook her head, lips pressed into a line. She wouldn't do that. She already did. Amanda burst into the room a moment later, as if summoned by the weight of accusation. She grabbed the letter and read it aloud, pacing as she did, voice rising with every word. "This is absurd! No right of appeal! Who even writes like this? She thinks this is over? She thinks she can just win?" Kelsey barely flinched. "You said she'd never fight back, that she didn't have it in her." Amanda snapped the paper straight. "Because she didn't. Not until you gave her a reason." The words hung there. Trevor stood, quietly. "I'm done trying to fix what you two set on fire." He left the room. Amanda didn't follow. Outside, across town, the house on Hollow Glen had taken on new life. Danica had added a small wooden porch swing to the front stoop, painted it herself, buttercream yellow to match the trim. 2 neighbors had already stopped by to compliment it that afternoon, one dropping off a jar of prickly pear jam, the other leaving a folded flyer for the community garden. Marlene walked the perimeter of the property just before dusk, her steps slow and measured. She wore a sun hat and carried a small gardening spade, though she had no intention of using it. She paused by the old stone path leading to the mailbox, the same one she used to weed when no one thanked her. Now it stood trimmed and cared for. She touched the cool metal of the mailbox lid, let her fingers rest there for a moment. It didn't belong to her name, but the soil beneath it did. And that was enough. Behind her, Danica was on the swing with a paperback in one hand and a glass of iced tea resting on the armrest. She didn't wave or call out. She simply looked up, smiled, and nodded. That was enough, too. The gate creaked open quietly an hour later. It was nearly dark, the porch lights casting soft golden rings on the garden. Josie slipped through like a shadow, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. Marlene was kneeling by the raised bed, pulling weeds that weren't quite weeds yet. She looked up and smiled, but didn't rush her. Josie came to sit beside her, pulling 2 packs of peanut butter crackers from her hoodie pocket. "I saved these at lunch," she whispered. "I didn't eat them at school. I wanted to share them with you." Marlene's eyes softened. "You always were a planner." They sat there side by side, knees in the dirt, passing crackers back and forth in silence. The sounds of the neighborhood floated around them. Distant music, a barking dog, the hum of sprinklers starting up. Josie leaned her head against Marlene's shoulder. "Do you think they know?" Marlene didn't ask who she meant. "They know enough," she said. "And the rest? They'll learn." The headline was discreet. No pull quotes, no boldface drama. Just black serif letters above a grayscale image of a mailbox with peeling numbers. Evicted, empowered, and a landlord. How one retired nurse turned the tables quietly. The story ran in the back third of Silver Compass, a national magazine for retirees that rarely made waves outside medical waiting rooms and library reading lounges. Marlene had submitted it under a pen name, not to hide but to focus the message. She hadn't wanted revenge porn or viral reposts, just the truth told plainly. She wrote of boundaries redrawn in bleach water, of dignity lost in small daily humiliations, of a woman who had handed her a mop instead of a welcome, and a daughter who echoed that gesture with eyes that wouldn't meet hers. The article never named names, no addresses, no specifics, just this: there's something sacred about knowing your own worth, not the kind measured in titles or space in someone's guest room, but the kind that can't be evicted, even when your suitcase is waiting by the door. She'd expected it to vanish into the back catalog of digital issues. Instead, the piece gained quiet traction. Retirement forums picked it up, neighborhood listservs. A few HOA boards shared it in their internal newsletters, citing a lesson in resilience and ownership. And someone, Marlene never found out who, submitted it to the local Glendale Chronicle. They ran a feature follow-up under the headline, "Who Really Owns the American Dream?" That was the one Amanda saw. She nearly dropped her coffee when the page loaded. She read the article 3 times, her pulse pounding louder each time. Then she called Kelsey, livid. "She's making us look like villains!" Amanda shrieked. "Do you know how many people in this community read the Chronicle?" Kelsey, still in pajamas and nursing a dull headache from too much boxed wine the night before, scrolled through the article in silence. "She didn't use our names," she muttered. "She didn't have to," Amanda barked. "Everyone knows. I got 3 texts from the HOA board already. One of them said, and I quote, 'Sometimes the floor needs to be wiped before the foundation can be poured.' They're quoting her now like she's Maya Angelou." Kelsey tried to respond, but nothing came. She was too busy staring at the byline photo, the grayscale mailbox, the peeling numbers, 1129, their old address. The story wasn't about them, but it lived in their bones. And the worst part? They couldn't touch it, couldn't disprove it, couldn't correct what had never accused them directly. At Danica's house, the porch swing creaked softly in the breeze as a letter arrived in Marlene's name, addressed in rounded handwriting on construction paper yellow. "Dear Ms. Winters, I'm Josie's teacher. I just wanted to say thank you. She talks about you with the kind of reverence I wish every child had for someone in their life. You raised someone worth knowing. P.S. The crackers in her lunch this week were peanut butter. I think you packed them. Marlene folded the letter and slid it into the same wooden frame that held Josie's thank you note. She rearranged the frame slightly on Danica's mantel, not out of vanity, but to make sure the words were seen. That same week, Ray met her at the corner diner, the same one where they'd first discussed the house. He slid a folder across the table, grinning. "This one's been sitting on the market for a while," he said. "Rental, 2-bed, solid bones, right across the street from Hollow Glen." Marlene opened the folder. Inside were the specs, photos, and paperwork already in motion. Ray tapped the LLC line at the bottom. "Same name?" he asked. Marlene sipped her coffee, then nodded. "Copper Sun works just fine." She didn't linger in the diner. She had somewhere to be. At sunset, she stood on the sidewalk facing Hollow Glen. Across the street, the new house sat in shadow, shutters closed, porch empty. It needed work, but nothing she hadn't handled before. Josie's voice rang out from behind Danica's screen door. "Grandma, the flowers opened." Marlene turned back toward the garden and smiled. She wasn't just reclaiming space, she was planting permanence. The moving truck pulled up just after noon, later than scheduled, but no one complained. No one had the energy. Kelsey stood on the cracked front walkway of the duplex they'd called home for barely 3 months, arms crossed, face blank. Trevor stayed inside, directing the movers with short, exhausted nods. The lease had expired at the end of the previous week. No extension had been granted. Their application to renew had been denied without explanation, just a bland form letter stating the property owner had other plans. It hadn't come from Marlene. That would have made things easier in a way. Instead, it came from a management company they couldn't trace, a pattern Kelsey now recognized too well. Across town, Amanda's text had come in 2 days earlier, right on cue. "If you're still too proud to ask for help, then fine. But Josie has a bed here. You all do." Kelsey didn't want to say yes, but she didn't have anywhere else to go. It wasn't until Josie overheard the conversation, Amanda's offer, Kelsey's silence, Trevor's resigned sigh, that the real break happened. Josie had stood in the hallway, backpack slung over one shoulder, holding her math folder like a shield. "I'm not living with her," she said quietly. Kelsey looked up, startled. "Sweetheart." "I'm not. I'll sleep in a car if I have to." There had been no tantrum, no tears, just a line drawn by a 10-year-old who'd seen too much to pretend anymore. And so, the next day, as the moving van creaked open and boxes were lifted one by one, Josie didn't speak. She stood beside the truck, arms wrapped around her stomach, eyes scanning the sidewalk across the street. That's where Marlene stood, quiet, still, gloved hands folded around the handle of a gardening fork. She didn't wave. She didn't gloat. She just watched. Her hair was tied back with a bandana. Her shirt was smudged with soil. But she stood tall, rooted. Danica came out onto the porch with a pitcher of iced tea and nodded politely to the movers. When Amanda stepped out of the van, wearing oversized sunglasses and her signature perfume cloud, a little too strong for August, Danica offered a neighborly smile. Amanda didn't return it. She adjusted her sunglasses and turned away. Some people only knew how to look forward when it suited them. The moving process took hours. The sun rose high, then slowly began to tip westward. Eventually, the last box was shoved into place. Josie climbed into the back seat of Trevor's aging sedan, but her eyes remained fixed on Marlene's front yard. The citrus trees had grown since spring, leaves glossy, fruit starting to bud. Marlene had cleared the weeds, retiled the border path, and painted the little shed where Amanda once stored seasonal wreaths she never hung herself. As the car idled, Josie opened the door and stepped out. Kelsey started to protest, but Trevor gently touched her arm. "Let her." Josie crossed the street quickly, head down. In one hand, she held a folded piece of lined notebook paper. She didn't say anything, just reached out and pressed it into Marlene's gloved palm. Marlene looked down at the paper, then up at Josie's face, flushed but steady. "I'll write you more," Josie whispered, "even if they say not to." Marlene crouched slowly, brought herself to her granddaughter's eye level. "You never have to stop," she said. "My mailbox isn't going anywhere." Josie nodded once, then turned and ran back to the car. No one else saw the exchange. Marlene didn't unfold the paper right away. She tucked it into her apron pocket like something fragile, something sacred. As the sedan drove off, Danica emerged with a broom and began sweeping the front step. She looked over at Marlene. "That the last of them?" Marlene nodded. Danica smiled. "Good, more room for better stories." Marlene didn't answer. She just reached into her pocket, touched the note. Across the street, the house she and Ray had closed on last week sat empty, its porch untouched by memory, but not for long. The closing took place in a quiet corner of Ray's office, away from the polished conference room where young couples signed first-time mortgages and posed for photos with oversized sold keys. Marlene didn't need that kind of pageantry. She had asked for a simple table, a fresh pen, and 15 minutes. She brought her own clipboard. Ray handed her the final transfer documents for the second house, the one across from Hollow Glen, the one that had been sitting empty since early summer with a rusted mailbox and curtains that hadn't been opened in months. "This one's officially yours," he said, tapping the signature line. "And just like before, Copper Sun holds the deed. No questions, no fingerprints." Marlene signed cleanly, her pen gliding across the page with practiced grace. Then she pulled another folder from her leather bag, her own documents, drawn up with the help of a lawyer Ray had introduced her to weeks ago. "These go in right after," she said, sliding the folder across the table. Ray flipped through them, reading quickly. His brow lifted slightly as he hit the third page. "Both properties placed in trust?" Marlene nodded once. "Josie inherits them, but not until she's 25. And there are conditions." Ray smiled. "You've built more than a portfolio." Marlene didn't smile back. Not exactly. But something in her shoulders relaxed. "I've built proof." Danica had agreed to help manage the second home after renovations. She'd already begun drawing up tenant screening policies and planned to repaint the front door herself, sky blue. She told Marlene, "If we're going to start again, it should look like mourning, not memory." Marlene liked that. 2 days later, she received a letter in a thick cream envelope with a return address from the Chestnut Bluffs HOA. Inside was a folded parchment certificate bordered in gold foil, presented to Marlene Winters for community resilience, stewardship, and contribution to neighborhood renewal. Tucked beneath the plaque was a typed note from Jeanette, the HOA president. "We don't always know who built the foundation, but we know when we're walking on something solid. Thank you. Jay." She placed the plaque on the mantel at Danica's house, right beside Josie's framed thank you letter and the note from her teacher. No spotlight, no shrine, just a row of quiet evidence. That same afternoon, Amanda called. The number came up unknown, but Marlene let it ring through anyway. Then another call came, this one from a blocked number, then a voicemail. It was Kelsey's voice. "Mom, I know she misses you. I know you know that. Amanda's asking if she can see her, just for a weekend." There was a pause. Then the rest came, quieter. "She thinks if it comes from me, you'll consider it. I told her not to ask, but she did anyway." Marlene didn't respond. She deleted the message. Josie had already chosen. Later that week, Marlene was out back when the mail carrier waved from the gate and handed her a letter. A thick white envelope with stickers on the back, stars and little doodled suns. Inside was a piece of cardstock, folded once, hand-drawn with colored pencils. A house, red shutters, flower boxes under the windows. A garden in front, citrus trees, rose bushes, a small blue shed. Beneath the roofline, in crooked block letters, home. She traced the pencil lines with her thumb. Then she tucked the card into the front pocket of her gardening apron, slid her gloves on, and went to check the soil by the swing. Across the street, the new house stood empty but full of potential. Danica had already planted wildflowers near the walkway, and Ray had a contractor scheduled for the fencing. This time there would be no suitcase waiting by the door. The third property sat on the edge of town, just past the new construction line where suburbia blurred into scrubland. The listing had landed in Marlene's inbox late one evening. 3-bed, 2-bath, priced under market due to long-term vacancy and a cracked foundation. Ray had flagged it as a strong opportunity. Low enough to renovate, stable enough to hold, Same LLC setup. You'd have it locked in within 10 days. But when Marlene drove out to see it, alone and without announcement, something felt different. The house wasn't haunted. It was hollow. A shell waiting for purpose, not just purchase. She stood at the edge of the dead lawn, arms folded, gaze lingering on the peeling shutters. There was no memory here, no insult to avenge, no soil that had ever held her name. She thought of Amanda's voice on Kelsey's voicemail, so desperate it had almost sounded human. She thought of Josie's letters, still tucked into her kitchen drawer, a pile growing taller than any resentment she could carry. And she thought of the woman she had once been, sitting in a motel room with a suitcase beside her, ledger open, trying to measure how much dignity $1 could buy. She turned, walked back to her car, and never looked at that listing again. That afternoon, she met Ray at the diner and handed him a different kind of request, this time for a donation transfer. Full amount, no strings. To who? He asked, scanning the check. A women's transitional housing group, she said. The one near the interstate. They help women who've been through worse than I ever have. I want them to have a foundation, even if it's just a start. Ray looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. You're not buying anything else, are you? Marlene smiled faintly. I've bought enough. When she told Danica, it was over tea on the back porch. The late summer heat had softened, and the garden smelled like damp earth and rosemary. Danica set her mug down slowly. You gave up a whole house? I didn't need another one. Danica looked away, eyes glassy. People don't do that, not when they've earned the right to win. I didn't want to win, I just didn't want to be erased. For a long time they sat there quietly, listening to the wind rustle through the citrus trees. Later that week, Josie came by after school. She dropped her backpack at the porch steps and marched across the yard with gardening gloves 2 sizes too big, a trowel tucked into her elbow like a soldier reporting for duty. What are we planting today? She asked. Marlene held up a small potted rose bush. This one's called Quiet Return, pale pink. Grows slow, but strong. Josie crouched beside her and dug with steady hands. They worked in silence, side by side, until the soil was packed and watered. Marlene handed her the little label stake to press into the ground. Josie read it aloud, squinting in the sunlight. Quiet Return. Fitting, isn't it? Marlene said. Josie nodded. Like us. The same day, across a different part of town, Amanda sat in front of her laptop as old HOA board messages began surfacing online. Threads she thought she had deleted years ago. Posts laced with snide jabs, coded language, and dismissive remarks about renters, about temporary people, about those who don't belong. It spread faster than she expected. A local watchdog group reposted the comments. Her name trended, not nationally, but just loud enough in local forums to make things uncomfortable. An old neighbor tagged her in a public comment. Is this the same Amanda Banks who called the city on a lemonade stand? Another replied, Karma moves quiet until it doesn't. Kelsey never called. Not even to defend her. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Marlene never expected her to. Some choices close more than just doors. They erase the right to knock again. The attorney's office smelled faintly of pine cleaner and ink, the kind of scent that wrapped around heavy file cabinets and secrets sealed in manila folders. Marlene sat in the straight-backed chair, her fingers steady around a pen as she flipped to the final page of her will. Across the desk, the estate planner waited silently. 2 properties, 1 trust, 1 granddaughter. Josie wouldn't receive them outright, not until she turned 25. That clause wasn't for control. It was for time to grow, to live, to learn how power worked before inheriting any of it. But the real detail was buried in the next section, beneath a line that read, Addendum, Legacy Lease Program. Every year, 1 family, 1 full year of rent forgiveness, quietly, without fanfare, chosen not by income alone, but by story, someone whose worth wasn't showing on paper yet. Josie would approve the family herself once she came of age. Until then, Danica would serve as the steward, trusted executor, day-to-day eyes on the ground. Marlene had already asked, and Danica had said yes without hesitation. "You're building something better than a home," she'd said. "You're building memory that matters." Now, inside the attorney's office, Marlene signed her name with calm, deliberate strokes. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was design. Later that evening, she slipped the legal packet into a fireproof safe she kept under her bed, beside a smaller box labeled Receipts. From there, she pulled out a blank black binder and began assembling the final document she knew Josie would one day open. On the front, she wrote in silver ink, "The house they gave up." Inside, she inserted carefully selected items, a copy of the mop receipt, faded but intact, from the grocery store that Kelsey had sent her to the day Amanda suggested she clean the guest bath while she was at it. Photocopies of the original deed transfers, LLC seals faint but visible. The denial letter, Josie's first drawing, the photo of the rosebush just after planting, and finally the article from Silver Compass, printed and annotated in the margins in Marlene's own hand. Each page was placed in its own sleeve, as if the moments themselves deserved preservation. The binder was thick by the time she closed it. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. A few days later, a letter arrived addressed in Josie's unmistakable handwriting. The envelope had been decorated with star stickers and what appeared to be a crude sketch of Danica's porch swing in the corner. Inside was a folded sheet of graph paper from her school notebook. "Dear Grandma, one day when I'm older, I'll try to explain all this to someone. They probably won't believe me. They'll say grandmas don't do that. But I'll remember. And I'll tell them, you never knew her. Loved, Josie. P.S. I told Ms. Danica we're gonna plant tomatoes next." Marlene read the letter twice, then folded it with practiced reverence and slipped it into the binder. She didn't add commentary, just slid it between the article and the deed, a quiet declaration, placed exactly where it belonged. That weekend, Danica arrived with a woven basket of fresh cuttings and a schedule for fall garden prep. They sat on the back patio as dusk settled over the trees, the air warm but no longer blistering. "Anything else you want to plant?" Danica asked, flipping through her notepad. Marlene shook her head. "I think we've planted enough." Danica smiled. "For now." From across the street, the porch light at the second house flicked on. A young mother stepped outside to call her son in from the sidewalk. The boy waved to Marlene. She waved back. The soil was rich now. The roots were deep. And behind her, in a drawer under the framed letters, the binder waited. Closed, but not finished. By mid-autumn, the two homes no longer felt like properties. They felt lived in, settled. Hollow Glen had found its rhythm again, and the blue-doored house across the street had become a quiet echo of the same energy. Children biked past at dusk, porch lights flicked on just before sundown. Someone always left cookies on someone else's doorstep. Marlene's garden had grown thick with memory and marigolds. Lavender bled over the border stones, and the citrus trees, once stiff and overwatered, now stretched wide, canopies full and humming with bees. A wood bench sat just outside the shed, painted pale green and sanded down by time and use. That was where the neighbors came now, not in emergencies, just in pause. Someone needed help picking a contractor. Someone else brought over a plate of zucchini muffins, just because. A teenager dropped off an old book he thought Josie might like. The bench became a kind of confession booth, shaded by roses and watched over by the swing. Danica called it the neighborhood's pause button. Marlene didn't argue. She just made sure the teapot was always full and the porch stayed swept. Most Tuesdays, Josie arrived after school with flour on her backpack and a fresh smudge of graphite on her thumb. She was taking a cooking elective now and insisted on showing Marlene every step she learned, sugar ratios, egg separation, even how to keep dough from collapsing in dry air. "She measures like you," Danica noted once, watching from the porch. "No guesswork. Just calm." Josie smiled. "Grandma says baking's just science that forgives you." Their best effort was a cinnamon bread shaped like a braid. It came out too soft in the middle but smelled like late October and warm blankets. They ate it anyway. On Saturdays, Danica co-hosted a literacy circle with 2 retired teachers from the next street over. They hung a fabric banner across the porch, hand-stitched letters reading "Books Grow Here," and laid out folding chairs for guests of all ages. Children read picture books aloud. A quiet man named Glenn recited a poem he hadn't touched in 20 years. Someone brought a guitar one afternoon, another brought cider. Marlene didn't sit in the spotlight. She arranged the bookmarks, kept the lemonade pitcher filled, listened. In all that time, Amanda's name never came up again. Not in HOA emails, not in committee meetings, not in whispered updates from Jeanette, who had once hosted her bridal shower. It was as if the ground itself had swallowed her presence whole. Kelsey left town not long after. No forwarding address, no explanations, just a last week of piled-up mail and then nothing. The local librarian who had watched Josie grow from toddler to reader noticed her stop asking about whether her mom would be joining them. "She's not coming," Josie said simply. "She's not gone, but she's not coming." And that was that. One afternoon in late November, Josie showed up after school with a bundle of leaves folded into a wax paper packet. "I learned how to press them," she said, "so we can put them in the binder." They added the red maple to the page labeled First Garden and tucked a corner of it beneath the photograph of the rose bush. The color bled slightly into the paper sleeve, and Marlene didn't mind. That night, after Josie had gone home, Danica and Marlene sat out back with fleece blankets and mugs of peppermint tea. The sky had gone dark early, stars blinking through the branches. "You ever wonder if she'll remember all this?" Danica asked. Marlene turned toward her. "I don't need her to remember every second." "No? She'll remember how it felt." Danica smiled, looked out toward the garden. "That's the part that lasts." Across the street, the second home's porch light blinked on. A renter, a quiet widow who'd once taught 6th grade, stepped outside with her cat and sat on the swing Marlene had helped restain. She waved, Marlene waved back. A breeze moved through the garden, and from somewhere behind them, the screen door creaked open. The documents came bound in navy linen, embossed in silver, estate declaration and trust succession, Winters, Copper Sun Holdings. Ray delivered them by hand, slipping the folder into Marlene's lap with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sealed letters and old photo albums. "It's done," he said. "She's named, sole trustee, executable at 25, all conditions honored." Marlene didn't open the folder right away. She just placed one hand on it, palm flat, fingers still, like she was grounding something before it lifted away from her for good. Later that afternoon, a folding table was set under the citrus trees, dressed with a plain white runner and a vase of pressed flowers Josie had arranged herself. The neighbors had gathered without being asked. Danica brought lemonade and a tray of oatmeal bars. Glenn from the literacy circle arrived with a harmonica he didn't play, just held. Jeanette wore a straw hat and sunglasses and nodded at everyone like she'd planned it, even though she hadn't. Ray stood off to the side, arms folded, watching the breeze ripple through the leaves. Marlene waited until Josie arrived to say anything. She stepped forward, holding the folder and a small, unassuming keychain. Brass, with the faint outline of a citrus blossom etched into its center. "You won't hold the title yet," she said, eyes on her granddaughter. "Not until you're ready, but what matters is, you know it's coming." Josie took the keychain, then the folder, both with two hands. Her posture had changed over the months, taller now, calmer. "You turned being kicked out into a blueprint," she said, voice quiet but certain. Marlene didn't blink. "Legacy isn't built with entitlement," she said. "It's built with keys." The neighbors didn't clap. There was no applause, just a respectful silence, thick with the weight of something sacred. Afterward, Danica guided a few of them into the garden shed. Not for a tour, just to show them a single thing. Mounted on the wall, in a glass-fronted shadow box, was the mop. The handle had been polished, the cloth threads cleaned, tied in a loose bow at the top. Below it, in a small brass plaque, the words, "Used once, then never again." Jeanette tilted her head. "That's the one, isn't it?" Danica nodded. "It was never about the mop. It was what it came with." Back outside, Josie lingered beside the rose bush she'd helped plant. She ran her fingers gently over a new bud, not yet bloomed. The porch light across the street flicked on. A boy leaned out to call for his cat. Everything felt full but not crowded, still but never silent. Later that evening, Marlene sat on the garden bench, alone now, dusk deepening around her. She didn't need a ceremony. Not really. This, the silence after a day done right, was her ritual. Josie reappeared just before the porch light blinked off. She sat beside her grandmother without saying a word. In her lap was the keychain, which she turned slowly in her fingers, over and over. After a long moment, she spoke. "I've been thinking about what to tell people. Later. When they ask." Marlene didn't rush her. "I'll tell them she used the mop once. Then never again," Josie said, eyes fixed on the garden path. "And I'll tell them what she left instead." Marlene's breath caught, but she didn't let it show. She reached over and placed her hand gently over Josie's. "They might not understand," she said softly. Josie nodded. "They won't have to." Marlene looked out at the two houses, windows glowing, fences mended, shutters fresh with paint. Nothing flashy, but nothing left broken. "They gave me the floor," Josie said, voice steady now. "I turned it into a foundation." And beside her, Marlene smiled, not for triumph, but for what had finally been made unshakable.